This week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim. The Torah has been given, and now the details are being spelled out. Mishpatim means commandments, one of the three kinds of mitzvahs that we were given. There are mitzvahs that make logical sense. We can see the benefit. We can understand the purpose. Those are called mishpatim. Then there are commandments that are commemorative, remembering the coming out of Egypt, remembering the sukkahs that we dwelt in during the 40 years in the desert. They commemorate. Shabbos commemorates creation. So they're like testimonials. They testify to an event. Those are called edus. And then there are commandments for which we have absolutely no explanation, no benefit, no practical function. Those are called chukim. Like separating meat and milk, not wearing a garment made of wool and linen, combined, three kinds of mitzvahs. So we begin with mishpatim, with the logical, reasonable, sensible laws, civil laws, and so on, that we might even come up with had the Torah not been given, because they're so practical, sensible. But the Torah says, these are the mishpatim, these are the commandments, you shall place before the people. Asher tosim lifneihem. What does that mean, place before them? These are the mitzvahs to tell the people. What does place before them mean? So the word in Hebrew for before them comes from the word panim, which means face. So it's like, put it in their face. But face means internal. You look at the back of a person's head, you don't know what's going on inside the person. But when you look at a face, you can tell what's going on. You can tell if the person is happy, sad, worried, frightened. It's all on the face. So the face means the internal person. In fact, in Hebrew, the word for face and inside are the same word. So here, God is telling Moshe, these are the mishpatim you shall place within them, meaning they should internalize it. When we do a mitzvah, serving God, of course, the main thing is the act. If you don't do it, then you haven't done it. Good intentions are not nearly sufficient. So intending to give charity doesn't do the poor man any good. So when you give charity, the act is the main thing, of course. And yet, it is also very meaningful, and God appreciates the way in which you do it, the feeling with which you do it, the understanding with which you do it. Certainly when it comes to giving charity, if you give it in a generous, positive mood, it's much easier for the poor man to accept it. If you give it begrudgingly or with an attitude of superiority, it makes it very uncomfortable for the hungry man to accept your offer. So yes, it makes a huge difference. But it's the same with every mitzvah. When we do a mitzvah, God wants it to be internalized. It should affect us internally, which means there should be an inner devotion to the act of the mitzvah, not merely obedience. So, in the words of the Rebbe, every mitzvah we do, as we do it, it should permeate every part of our being, our emotions, our intellect, our will, and our pleasure. You do a mitzvah, you do it with emotion. If you can get a higher, deeper level of performance, you do it with an understanding, with a conviction in the mind that this is the right thing. Then you develop a will where the mitzvah practically becomes an instinct. I remember seeing this little kid falls down, 3-year-old little boy. He falls down, gets frightened, didn't hurt himself terribly, but he was frightened and he was hurt. And the first thing he did was grab his yarmulke to keep it from falling off, his kippah. Just instinctive. That means it has become part of his personality. It's become part of his being. That's called will. The mitzvah has become the will of the child. And then, of course, the highest level is pleasure, to get a pleasure from doing the mitzvah. Now, this is not limited to the mitzvahs that make sense. If the mitzvah makes sense, then already you're involved. It's not just an act. You understand the purpose, you understand the reason. Your mind dictates that this is the right thing to do. But even those commandments that have no reason. And here the Rebbe says something a little unusual and insightful. You don't see it in other commentaries. When you perform a mitzvah that has no reason, but you're doing it with the confidence that if I were smarter, if I was really brilliant, I would understand the reason. I don't know the reason because I'm not that smart. But if I was really smart, I would see the reason. And even if no one is smart enough to see the reason, God has a good reason. So I do the mitzvah relying on the logic that I don't have, but it exists somewhere, either in somebody smarter than me or in God himself. That would not be an appropriate way of fulfilling this mitzvah. The mitzvah that has no reason has to be fulfilled and practiced because God asked, not because there's a good reason. So if you're relying on the fact that God has a good reason, you're not doing the mitzvah properly. There are mitzvahs that have reason, and you have to understand that reason and appreciate the reason. But then there are mitzvahs that, for very good reason, has no reason. So how do you fulfill that mitzvah? If God says, you do it. So you're obeying God, not reason. But if you think God has a good reason, well, then you're not obeying God, you're doing it for the reason that you don't happen to know. Like, for example, what is true faith? If I believe you, I trust you completely. But the reason I trust you completely is because my experience with you has been that you are reliable, you're very smart, you know what you're doing, and you're always right. Now you're saying something or asking me to do something that doesn't seem right. But I will do it anyway because I trust you. But what am I really trusting? Am I trusting you, or am I trusting my experience that I've had with you up until now? Since you've never lied to me before, you've never given me bad advice before, I trust that now, even though I don't understand it, you're giving me good advice again. So what am I trusting? Who am I trusting? I'm actually trusting my own experience. I've followed your advice before, and it's been a good experience. So I have learned from my experience to trust you. That's not really trusting you. Or in different words, you had to prove yourself to me before I would trust you. Real trust means I'm doing it because you asked. I don't have to have good experiences, past experience, prior experience, none of that. If you're asking, that's what I do. Because I'm connecting to you, not to good experiences. So this statement, place the mitzvah before them or into them, means inspire them, teach them, enlighten them until they do more than just observe and fulfill the act, but that the act of the mitzvah actually permeates all part of their thinking, their feeling, so that even when you don't know the reason for the mitzvah, you have a reason to obey God because He's God. And that makes sense to you. And you're convinced that that's correct. This is a Hasidic approach. Internalize. Because there's an internal part to you that the internalization of the mitzvah corresponds to. Whereas if you don't internalize the mitzvah, the internal you, internal, not eternal, the internal you is not being fed. The inner being needs an inner experience of the mitzvah. The act itself doesn't do that. And that's why we learn Hasidus, we think about the mitzvah, we get to know God, so that when we serve Him, it's an entire person serving, not just an act. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program, there's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.